we're in this valley. It's just surrounded by beautiful mountains, and the skies are amazing. Just, just spiritual. I was walking just through this neighborhood at night, and there's this beautiful, full moon, and it was enormous. And I was in these just rolling clouds, and just this beautiful sky. And I was listening to the Moonlight Sonata of Beethoven, and I was feeling really sad. God, do you really want this story? It's a good story. It's a love story. And I had never been in love before. It's always just been just selfish reasons, and I liked people I guess I loved people for loving me. I was more interested in just sex, and I just wasn't mature enough. And then one magic day, I was taking my grandma to this writing store, and I saw this guy, and I looked at him and I was like, fucking faggot, look at this guy. He looks so gay. But I didn't talk to him. We go next Sunday, and I'm like, oh, there's that guy again. What is he wearing? Who wears this? And I talked to him for a little bit, and his voice is beautiful. He just has this beautiful voice. And I was like, wow. I wasn't expecting this. And I just melted. I was like, wow. This guy's amazing. What's this guy's story? He dresses like a weirdo. Grandma and I left. I was feeling enchanted. And so I'm like, Grandma, let's go to the Tabula Rasa next Sunday. And she's like, okay. And so, next Sunday, I'm like ready to go. I'm looking good. I go in there and I'm looking around, and there he is. And we talk some more, and he was like, okay, what's your number? So I give him my number. And, I'm feeling really good. So Grandma and I leave. And he never calls. I'm just like, oh, ouch. And so I was like, okay, whatever. So I go back again next Sunday. And I'm just, casual, cool about it. I'm like, yeah, great story here. It seemed like he was straight, but he was like the gayest straight guy I know. And so, just his interests and his style. So, he gives me his number. And, I was feeling good that day too. I'm like leaving with Grandma, and I'm just like on fire. I'm just like, like grabbing this number like in the fist of my hand, just like, connection. And I find out he's a dancer. I went to see his piece one night. It was amazing. He was an amazing dancer. With the voice and the way he danced and the whole setup. I was amazed. And so we became really good friends. But, he didn't know that I hung out with boys. And so I wanted to tell him. I wanted to tell him my feelings. I was like, hey, do you want to go biking out at Antelope Island? I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so we take our bikes to Antelope Island, and, nature was on my side that day. It was just beautiful skies. We had the whole island to ourselves. We're biking and, just having a great time. I was like, I'm going to tell him. But how do I tell him? It's so scary. I'm like, Brandon, I got to tell you my feelings. I'm in love, for the first time in my life. I gotta tell somebody about it. And it's like, okay. I'm like, I've just never had these feelings before. They're such like pure, beautiful feelings to me. Who is it? Because all of a sudden we have like mutual friends and stuff. I was like, well, I want them to be the first ones to know. But I want to tell you about my feelings. You know, we both, kind of got emotional about it. He kept on thinking it was this girl, this mutual girl that we knew. But he thought it was beautiful. He was just like, wow, that's beautiful. That's something that I want. And he understood the feelings. He understood like what I was feeling. And, he saw the beauty in that. I've never, I was so just, I wasn't selfish about it. I wasn't like, oh, what can I get from this relationship? The scale, what could I give or take? I was just, like really compassionate, towards this person, and, just loved him, with all my heart. I was like, do you know who it is? And he was like, is it, this girl? I'm like, no, Brandon, it's you. These feelings I have are for you. He was like shocked, because he went from third person of me talking about somebody else to like first person, but he understood the feeling. He didn't say anything. He was just shocked. He had no idea. And it was silent and awkward. And so I was like, okay, and the sun was setting, so I was like, well, let's go. We're biking back, and it's quiet. I'm just like thinking, what is he thinking? And I hear swearing. He's swearing. I'm like, oh God, he's angry. That's the last, feeling, I wanted from him. He wasn't angry at me. He was just angry that he thought this would be the end of our friendship. And, he just told me that, he just wasn't, he didn't see me in the same way. And that he really, loved our friendship, but, anything more than that, he couldn't even think that way. I saw him perform again, and I was just like, who am I kidding? I still have expectations. I'm still hoping. So I was like, well, Brandon, I can't hang out with you. I'm just like, you're tearing me up inside without you even knowing it. He was pretty upset about it. And, he gave me this like long hug. I'm just like, this is awful. This is painful. And I was listening to the Moonlight Sonata. I cried because it was such a beautiful feeling. And this song that I was listening to with this moon in the sky, and my emotions were all together. I get a lot of those feelings in this town, just being in touch with my surrounding area and nature. And, between Brandon and I, we never worked out as lovers, but 5 years later, we became friends again. I could say now that, that passion and that flutter is over. I don't have any expectations in him again. I can honestly say that I just want to be friends. But I'll always love him because he was the first love of my life. We never even did anything. We didn't do anything. But just, having him giving me that emotion, I'll always be thankful for that. That was probably the last time I fluttered. That's the end of that story.